G'day comrades, welcome to the Mind in 1500 Words. New Papers in Consciousness Studies, Episode 2, Moorman and Russo in Press. Does attention increase the value of choice alternatives in trends in cognitive sciences? No, probably not, is the short answer Moorman and Russo give us. Actually, they are a bit more conservative than that. They're happy to conclude that there isn't sufficient evidence to support the claim, which is very responsible and dignified of them, but I like their argument and am neither responsible nor dignified. So Moorman and Russo's argument is about the role of attention in decision making and how we value the things we're making decisions about. So we're looking at a specific debate that will help us understand what it is to have free will, or be a decision-making agent if you're scared of the word free will because you're a closet dualist, and how we come to subjectively like things. Moorman and Russo are interested here in the claim that simply paying attention to something causes us to like it more. This is called the mere exposure effect, and matters to decision-making because it's entirely intuitive to think that when we choose between different options, we go with the one that we like more. Yes, or more generally that we value more, but the examples are mostly food, so liking is fine. There's a couple of sources of evidence for this discussed. The first is direct evidence. The second is a bit more indirect. The direct evidence comes from studies that purportedly get people to pay attention for different amounts of time to different stimuli and then choose between them. The indirect evidence comes from experiments which don't do this, but which give evidence in support of models of decision making which claim, in part, that paying attention to something makes us like it more. Moorman and Russo argue that neither line of reasoning is convincing. They take the direct evidence first. As an example, they use a study by Shimojo and colleagues from 2003. They note, and we should too, that Shimojo and colleagues didn't propose that there is a simple relationship such that attending to a stimuli just makes us like it more. Rather, they thought that paying attention to something makes us like it more, and that liking something makes us pay more attention to it. But the mere exposure effect here is still part of the causal loop. In Shimojo and colleagues' study, subjects had to choose which face of a pair they found more attractive. They looked at one, then the other. In some conditions, subjects were 50-50 as to which one they chose. However, when subjects had to move their eyes to fixate on an image, and when each image was shown 6 or 12 times rather than just 2, subjects chose the face that appeared on the screen longer in around 60% of trials. This suggests subjects are caused to like a face more when their attention is drawn to it for longer periods of time. As Moorman and Russo argue, this assumes a simple relationship between liking and choice, i.e., subjects always choose the face they like more. Given the task here, I don't think this is a massive challenge for Shimojo and colleagues. It comes down to, can you infer people's preferences based on them being asked explicitly to make a choice based on their preferences, i.e. which you find more attractive. But the role of liking /preference /value in choice isn't always that simple, and this will be a big deal later in the argument. Moorman and Russo agree that there is other evidence that sometimes we are more likely to choose things we pay more attention to. What they're not convinced by is the claim that this is because we come to like that thing more. When a magician makes you pick the 3 of hearts from a fast-moving deck by holding that card still for a little longer than the others, it'd be pretty surprising if you walked away liking the 3 of hearts more than the other cards. What Moorman and Russo are building toward here is a rejection of theories which claim that liking something more is sufficient or necessary to choose that thing. Importantly for Moorman and Russo's argument, other studies have failed to provide evidence for the mere exposure effect on liking. They point to a study by Glaholt and Reingold in which subjects were asked to choose a favourite from 8 pictures. If paying attention to something makes one like it more, then subjects should be more likely to choose a picture they had seen before. But Glaholt and Reingold found that being shown 4 of the pictures before making the choice from the 8 didn't make a difference as to what the subjects chose. Now, my impression is that there are more differences between this study and Shimojo and colleagues than Moorman and Russo acknowledge. But it's still fair to conclude that simply having seen something in the past doesn't always mean subjects are more likely to choose it. So Moorman and Russo conclude that studies don't consistently find evidence that paying attention to something makes us like it more, even if there is evidence it does make us choose it more at least some of the time. They are happier with evidence that liking something makes us pay more attention to it, but we can treat that as an aside for today. Let's turn to the indirect evidence. The general shape of the argument here is an inference to the best explanation and then a challenge to that inference. We are given a model which explains existing findings about decision making. This model is thus justified by the inference to the best explanation. This model requires that attending to things causes people to like them more. Support for this model thus supports the claim that attention causes liking, even where it doesn't test that directly. Moorman and Russo then challenge this by arguing that there are other accounts of the findings explained by the model, thus the initial inference to the best explanation isn't supported. The model in question is called the attentional drift diffusion model. This model is based on earlier drift diffusion models which aim to explain simple perceptual decisions. Say I'm shown dots moving on a screen and I'm asked if they're going left or right. I make a decision about this based on what I see. Drift diffusion models were used to model reaction time differences for different stimuli, based on how quickly subjects can gain evidence through their senses about what's happening. The newer version of this describes how attention makes a difference to the rate at which evidence is gathered. This is tested using eye tracking to see, for example, where on the moving dots subjects look in order to perceive if they are mostly going left or mostly going right. By paying more attention to the correct part of the stimuli, the subject can more quickly make a discrimination. To apply this kind of model to the kind of preference-based choices Moorman and Russo are interested in, some further assumptions need to be made. First, it must assume that the subjective value of a stimuli in a preference-based decision plays an analogous role to things like evidence of direction of motion in a perceptual decision. This sounds weird on the face of it, and Moorman and Russo don't expand on this much, perhaps because it's the position they disagree with. Second, it must assume that fixating on, i.e. looking at, something means the subject is paying attention to it. This is problematic, especially in some of the tasks we've seen so far, e.g. in Shimojo and colleagues' task, subjects saw faces in a sequence, and just because their eyes have moved to see the new picture doesn't guarantee they're not still thinking about the previous picture. They'd have to be at least a little bit if they're making a comparison between them. Third, attentional drift diffusion models, when applied to perceptual decisions, often start from the assumption that attention works by randomly sampling from a stimuli. But this won't be the case if how much we like something determines how much attention we pay to it. The shape of the argument here is that Moorman and Russo are attacking the application of this model to value-based decisions at all, thus undermining the inference to the best explanation. Indeed, they challenge the idea that the kind of perceptual discriminations these models are aimed at are decisions at all. The very quickness of a perceptual discrimination, they suggest, makes it qualitatively different from a preference-based decision. So, why was a model that was aimed at perceptual discrimination applied to value-based decisions in the first place? What does it explain that would justify the inference to the best explanation? The evidence here is what Moorman and Russo call higher value, faster reaction time. This is a general effect found in decision tasks, which is essentially that if people have to choose between two things they like, they are faster than if they have to choose between two things they don't like as much, even if the relative difference is the same. Suppose someone, not saying who, rates how much they like cucumbers at 10 and strawberries at 9. Whereas they rate eggplants at 4 and tomato at 3. When they ask to choose between pairs of foods later, they'll make the cucumbers or strawberries decision faster than the eggplant or tomato decision, and not necessarily be consistent with any of them. This odd little result is predicted by the mathematics of the attentional drift diffusion model, provided of course that value is treated as analogous to evidence. The mathematics of this isn't too hard, and you can check that out in the paper. But roughly, what we see is the more evidence we have, so the more dots moving left, the more counter-evidence is devalued, and devalued quickly, leading to faster reaction times, because whatever value in the equation that is used to represent a decision about the direction the dots are moving is reached faster, and the subject responds faster. If value acts in this same way, then whatever number in the equation is enough to represent a decision is reached faster with higher valued stimuli, again by more rapidly devaluing the other stimuli. Look, of course, Mormon and Russo point out that there is no reason to think our brains actually compute by doing this sort of digital number crunching. But even if the maths does roughly get the same input-output relations as the mind, there are alternative explanations of this effect available, and so the inference to the best explanation step is blocked. One of the options Mormon and Russo propose is that the higher value, faster reaction time effect is explained by attempts to reduce wasted effort. This comes back to the point made earlier, that in value-based decision-making, how much we like something isn't the only thing that makes a difference to the decision we make. Whilst there are other motivations at play, such as appearing consistent with the numerical ratings given at the start of the experiment, effort plays a big role in these studies. In a typical task like this, a subject might make 200 decisions and only be given the output of one of them. Where either choice is highly valued, such as in the cucumbers or strawberries example, it doesn't matter. The subject is still getting something they like, and so the effort of a fine-grained distinction isn't worth it. So, unlike me, who is still stuck between two equally appealing bales of hay from first year, the subject chooses randomly and quickly, and then moves on. The bigger picture here is that liking isn't the only thing that subjects take into account in making decisions. Subjects have multiple goals that need to be accounted for, and models that fail to do this should be rejected. This second argument has taken a more indirect path through an effect that might support a model that implies intention causes liking. Mormon and Russo have raised some serious objections to the application of that model, the attentional drift diffusion model, to value-based decisions at all, and so created problems for it in an argument that attention causes liking. That'll do me for today. Next time I'll be back with something from the educational series. I do commend the Mormon and Russo to all of you.